I was eating leftover pizza at my desk, halfway through designing a logo for a local coffee shop, when the email arrived. In subject, urgent, estate matter concerning James Whitmore Ashford. Mr. Cole Brennan. This is Duncan Garrett, senior partner at Garrison, Mercer and Associates. We represent the estate of James Whitmore Ashford. We need to speak with you immediately regarding a matter of significant inheritance. Please call our office at your earliest convenience. This is time sensitive. Attached DNA analysis report. Paternity confirmation. I'd stared at that email for 5 full minutes, pizza forgotten, my mouse hovering over the attachment, James Whitmore Ashford. The name meant nothing to me, but the subject line, estate matter and inheritance, those words had made my heart pound. I'd clicked the attachment, a PDF from a genetic testing company, lab results, markers, percentages, and at the bottom, in bold, probability of paternity. 99.97%. Subject, Cole Michael Brennan. Father, James Whitmore Ashford, deceased. My hands had started shaking so badly I'd had to set down my mouse. I'd been adopted at birth. 35 years ago, a woman I'd never met had given birth to me and signed away her rights before I'd even left the hospital. My adoptive parents, good people, loving people who'd raised me well, had told me this when I was old enough to understand. They'd told me it was a closed adoption, that my birth parents had wanted anonymity, that there were no records I could access, no trail to follow, no way to ever find them. I'd made peace with that, had lived my whole life as Cole Brennan, graphic designer, ordinary guy with ordinary parents who'd chosen me and loved me. And now, at 35, an email was telling me my biological father had been someone named James Whitmore Ashford, someone important enough to have lawyers sending urgent emails about inheritances. I'd Googled the name with trembling fingers. James Whitmore Ashford, 68 years old, died 3 months ago from a heart attack. Billionaire industrialist, founder and CEO of Ashford Global Industries, a manufacturing and real estate conglomerate worth $94 million, known philanthropist, art collector, owner of one of the largest private yachts in the country. And according to a DNA test I'd taken as a joke 6 weeks ago, my biological father. My name is Cole Brennan, 35 years old, graphic designer, adopted at birth. Never knew my real family, never expected to. Until a $39 DNA kit from a Black Friday sale matched me to a dead billionaire. And when his lawyers told me what he'd left me and who tried to stop me from getting it, everything I thought I knew about my life shattered. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that hype button to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where you're all watching from. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been at a barbecue at my best friend Marcus's house. His wife Nina had been excited about some genealogy project she'd started. "Look at this," she'd said, showing me her phone. "I did one of those DNA tests and found out I'm 23% Scandinavian. I had no idea." "That's cool," I'd said politely, not really caring. "You should do one. Don't you want to know your ancestry?" "I'm adopted," I'd reminded her. It would just tell me about my birth parents' ancestry, people I've never met and never will meet. But isn't that interesting? To know where you came from genetically? Marcus had jumped in. "Leave him alone, Nina. Cole's not interested." But Nina had already been pulling up the website on her phone. "Look, they're on sale. Black Friday special, $39 instead of $99. You should at least try it. What have you got to lose?" $39. That had been the deciding factor. Not curiosity about my heritage, not a burning need to know my ancestry. Just the fact that it was cheap enough to be an impulse purchase. "Fine," I'd said. "I'll do it. But I'm not expecting anything interesting." The kit had arrived a week later. I'd spit in the tube, mailed it back, and forgotten about it. 4 weeks after that, I'd gotten an email. "Your DNA results are ready." I'd logged in expecting to see percentages, Irish, German, whatever. Instead, I'd seen a notification I hadn't anticipated. "You have a close family match." James Ashford, parent-child relationship. I'd clicked on the profile. Minimal information, age 68, location New York. Last active 3 months ago. There'd been a message option. I'd stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the button. This person was either my biological father or mother, a parent I'd never known, someone who might have answers about where I came from, why I'd been given up, who I really was. I'd clicked Send Message. "Hi, I just got my DNA results and it says we're a parent-child match. I was adopted at birth in 1989. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I think you might be my biological father or mother. I'd love to talk if you're open to it. Cole." I'd waited. Days passed. No response. A week later, I'd checked the account again. The profile for James Ashford now said, account status, deceased. My potential biological father had died before even seeing my message. I'd felt a strange grief for someone I'd never met. A door that had briefly opened, then slammed shut before I could walk through it. I'd closed the website and tried to move on. And then, 2 weeks later, the lawyers had contacted me. Garrison, Mercer, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. I'd taken the train in from my apartment in Queens, wearing the one suit I owned, feeling completely out of place. The receptionist had directed me to a conference room on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a mahogany table that probably cost more than my annual rent, leather chairs, art on the walls that looked expensive. Duncan Garrett had greeted me at the door, 60-something, silver hair, expensive suit, firm handshake. Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming. Please sit. 2 other people had been in the room, a woman in her 50s, Catherine Mercer, co-executor, and a younger man with a laptop, Thomas Chen, estate attorney. I'd sat, my hands sweating, my heart racing. Mr. Brennan, Duncan had begun, I'm sure you're confused about why we've contacted you. The email said something about an inheritance from James Whitmore Ashford, but I've never met him. I only found out he might be my biological father because of a DNA test. That DNA test is why we're here, Duncan had said. James Ashford registered his DNA with the same service approximately 2 years ago. He was searching for someone. Specifically, he was searching for a son he'd believed had been given up for adoption in 1989. My throat had gone dry. He was looking for me? Yes. He'd spent significant resources over the last decade trying to locate you, hired private investigators, filed petitions to unseal adoption records. But the adoption was closed, the records sealed. He was told repeatedly that it was impossible. So he registered with a DNA site hoping I might take a test? Exactly. It was, as he described it to me, a Hail Mary. He didn't expect it to work, but he wanted every possible avenue explored. Why? Why was he looking for me? Catherine had leaned forward. Because you're his son, Cole, his only child, and he wanted to know you. Duncan had pulled out a file, thick with documents. Let me tell you about James Ashford, about who he was and how you came to exist. He'd opened the file and begun reading from what looked like a personal statement. James Ashford was born in 1956 to a wealthy family. His father was a real estate developer. James followed in those footsteps, but expanded into manufacturing and international business. By 30, he was running his own company. By 40, he was worth $50 million. By 50, over $200 million. He was successful, I'd said, stating the obvious. Very, but his personal life was complicated. In 1988, when he was 32, he had a relationship with a woman named Sarah Brennan. I'd frozen. Brennan, my last name. Yes, Sarah was your mother. She was 24, an artist. They dated for 6 months. It was serious, or so James thought. He was planning to propose. What happened? She got pregnant with you, and James was thrilled. He wanted to marry her, raise you together, build a family. But Sarah had different plans. Duncan had paused, looking uncomfortable. Sarah came from a difficult background. Her family had a history of mental illness. Her mother had schizophrenia. Her older brother had bipolar disorder. Sarah herself struggled with severe anxiety and depression. When she found out she was pregnant, she became convinced she couldn't be a mother. Convinced she'd pass on her family's mental health issues. Convinced she'd fail you. So she gave me up, I'd said quietly. She gave you up. Without telling James. She disappeared one day, 6 months pregnant, changed her phone number, moved to another state. James looked for her desperately but couldn't find her. And then, 7 months later, he received a letter. Catherine had pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten letter. This is what Sarah sent him. James, by the time you read this, it will be too late. I had the baby, a boy. I named him Cole after my grandfather, and I gave him up for adoption. I know you wanted to be a father. I know you'll hate me for this. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't risk passing on my family's problems. I couldn't risk being the kind of mother who fails her child because she can't handle her own mind. The adoption is closed. You can't find him. I made sure of that. It's better this way. He'll have a real family. Parents who can actually take care of him. He'll have a chance at a normal life. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But it's all I can give you. Don't look for me. I won't respond if you do. Sarah. I'd read that letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. James was devastated, Duncan had continued. He tried to find you anyway, hired investigators, filed legal challenges. But the adoption had been processed in Pennsylvania, where closed adoptions are nearly impossible to unseal without both birth parents' consent. And Sarah had disappeared. No one could find her. Where is she now? I'd asked. Is she alive? Catherine had looked sad. She died in 2003. Suicide. She'd struggled with depression her entire adult life. James learned about her death through an obituary. He tried again to find you, but even with her death, the records remained sealed because of the nature of the adoption. My birth mother. Dead for 20 years. Someone I'd never meet, never know, never get answers from. So he spent decades looking for me, I'd said slowly. And then registered with a DNA site hoping I'd take a test. Yes. And 3 months ago, just before he died, your profile showed up as a match. He saw it. He contacted us immediately to begin the process of reaching out to you. But then he died, I'd finished. Yes, a heart attack. Sudden and massive. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. We'd sat in silence for a moment. Mr. Brennan. Cole, Duncan had said. James Ashford spent the last 25 years of his life hoping to find you, hoping to know you, hoping to build a relationship with a son he'd never met. He died before that could happen, but he made sure that even in death, he could provide for you. Provide for me how? Duncan had pushed a document across the table, a will, dated 6 months ago. He left you everything. I'd stared at the will, trying to process the words I was reading. Last will and testament of James Whitmore Ashford III, James Whitmore Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. To my son, Cole Michael Brennan, I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to all financial assets, accounts, and investments, estimated value $47 million, all real property, including primary residence at 432 Park Avenue, New York, estimated value $28 million, all business interests, specifically 100% ownership of Ashford Global Industries, estimated annual revenue $94 million, all personal property, including art collection, estimated value $8 million, vehicle collection, estimated value $4 million, and yacht Sarah's Dream, estimated value $15 million. Contents of private vault at Manhattan Secure Storage, including rare gold bullion and historical artifacts, estimated value $12 million. Total estimated estate value, $114 million. I'd stopped breathing. This can't be real, I'd whispered. It's very real, Catherine had said gently. James updated his will 6 months ago, right after finding your DNA match. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, you would inherit everything. But I never met him. I didn't even know he existed until 6 weeks ago. That didn't matter to him. You're his son. That was all that mattered. I'd scanned the rest of the document. Pages of legal language, lists of assets, specifications and conditions. And then I'd reached a section that made my blood run cold. Note: during the drafting of this will, an attempt was made by my brother, Harrison Ashford, to contest my mental capacity and claim that my son Cole Brennan does not exist or cannot be located. This claim was made in bad faith with the intent to prevent my son from inheriting. I state here, clearly and unequivocally, that I am of sound mind, that my son exists, and that Harrison's attempts to interfere with this inheritance are fraudulent and self-serving. I'd looked up at Duncan. His brother tried to stop this? Duncan and Catherine had exchanged a look. That, Duncan had said carefully, is the complicated part we need to discuss. Harrison Ashford, Duncan had said, pulling out another file, is James's younger brother, 65 years old, currently unemployed, though he likes to call himself a private investor. Tell me the truth, I'd said. What's he really? A parasite, Catherine had said bluntly. He's lived off James's money his entire adult life, never held a real job, never built anything, just spent his brother's money and waited for James to die so he could inherit everything. And he would have, Duncan had continued, if you hadn't existed. James's previous will, written 15 years ago, left everything to Harrison. James had no wife, no children that he knew of, no other family. Harrison was his only living relative, so naturally he'd been named heir. But then James found my DNA match, I'd said. Exactly, and James immediately came to us to update his will, to leave everything to you instead. But somehow Harrison found out. How? We don't know for certain, but we suspect he'd been monitoring James's activities. He'd been pressuring James for years about the will, about his inheritance, making sure he was still the primary beneficiary. When James suddenly came to update his will, Harrison must have gotten suspicious. Thomas, the estate attorney, had pulled up something on his laptop. 2 months ago, we received a legal filing from Harrison's attorney. It was a petition claiming that James was suffering from dementia and was not competent to update his will. It also claimed that the supposed son James had found was either a fraud or couldn't be verified. But the DNA test, Harrison claimed it was a scam, that someone had hacked the DNA site and created a fake match to trick James into changing his will. He demanded the court block any will updates until a full psychiatric evaluation could be completed and the DNA match could be independently verified. Did the court agree? No. We provided documentation of James's mental competency. Multiple doctors had evaluated him as part of the estate planning process, and we provided the DNA results from a certified lab, not just the Ancestry website. The petition was dismissed. But Harrison didn't stop there, Catherine had said, her voice hard. He escalated. She'd pulled out a stack of papers, each one stamped with official seals. Harrison hired private investigators to try to prove you didn't exist. He filed Freedom of Information requests trying to access sealed adoption records, which is illegal. He contacted hospitals in Pennsylvania trying to find records of your birth, also illegal. He even tried to bribe a court clerk to alter adoption records to show you died as an infant. My hands had clenched into fists. He tried to erase me. Yes, he tried to erase you so he could inherit everything. When the legal route failed, he turned to criminal activity. We have documentation of all of it. We reported it to the authorities, but by then, James had died, and the situation became more complicated. Complicated how? Duncan had leaned back in his chair. Because technically, Harrison is still contesting the will. He's filed a new petition claiming that James's death invalidates the will updates because they were made under duress from our firm. He's claiming we manipulated James into believing you existed so we could control the estate. That's insane. It's also false, but it's tying up the probate process. The estate is in limbo while the court sorts out Harrison's claims, and that means you can't access your inheritance yet. How long will that take? Could be months, could be a year. It depends on how aggressively Harrison fights and what evidence he can manufacture. Manufacture? Catherine had nodded grimly. He's desperate. The previous will left him $114 million. The new will leaves him nothing. James explicitly disinherited him after the fraud attempts. Harrison has gone from expecting a 9-figure inheritance to getting nothing. He'll do anything to overturn this will. I'd sat with that information, trying to process it all. A father I'd never met had left me everything. An uncle I'd never met was trying to steal it all, and I was caught in the middle, the biological son who'd spent 35 years not knowing any of this existed. What do I do? I'd asked finally. You fight, Duncan had said. You prove you exist. You prove the DNA match is real. You prove you're James Ashford's son and rightful heir, and you make sure Harrison doesn't steal what James wanted you to have. The court had ordered a mediation session before the full probate hearing, a chance for both sides to present their cases and potentially reach a settlement without a lengthy trial. Duncan had warned me. Harrison will try to intimidate you. He'll try to make you feel like an imposter. Don't let him. The mediation had been held in a conference room at the courthouse. Neutral territory. A mediator, Judge Patricia Morrison, retired, had presided. Harrison Ashford had arrived with his own lawyer, a man named Gerard Hutchins, who looked like he charged $800 an hour. Harrison himself had looked like an older, crueler version of the photos I'd seen of James. Same height, same build, same sharp features. But where James's photos had shown warmth in his eyes, Harrison's eyes had been cold. He'd looked at me like I was an insect. So you're the supposed heir, he'd said, not bothering to hide his contempt. I'm James's son, I'd said evenly. You're a con artist who got lucky with a DNA test. The DNA test is certified. Multiple labs confirmed it. I'm his biological son. Convenient that you showed up right after he died. Convenient that you never contacted him while he was alive. Convenient that you're claiming an inheritance you didn't even know existed 6 months ago. Judge Morrison had intervened. Mr. Ashford, please, let's keep this professional. Harrison had leaned back in his chair, smirking. I'm just stating facts. This person, he'd gestured at me dismissively, claims to be my brother's son based on a mail-order DNA test. He has no relationship with James, never met him, never spoke to him, and suddenly he's entitled to everything my brother built? Your brother wanted him to have it, Catherine had said firmly. James spent years looking for Cole. He updated his will specifically to leave everything to his son. You know this because you tried to stop it. I tried to protect my brother from fraud. You tried to maintain your inheritance, Duncan had corrected, and when legal methods failed, you turned to illegal activity. We have documentation of your attempts to access sealed records, bribe court officials, and manufacture evidence. Gerard, Harrison's lawyer, had jumped in. Those are serious accusations. Do you have proof? We have affidavits from the court clerk you attempted to bribe. We have emails from the private investigators you hired to prove Cole didn't exist. We have phone records showing you contacted hospitals in Pennsylvania pretending to be a state official. Yes, Mr. Hutchins, we have proof. Harrison's face had flushed red. I was verifying information. That's not illegal. Impersonating a government official is illegal. Attempting to bribe a court clerk is illegal. Accessing sealed adoption records without authorization is illegal. You committed multiple crimes trying to prevent Cole from inheriting. I was protecting my family's legacy. You were protecting your bank account, I'd said quietly. Harrison had turned to me, his eyes full of rage. You don't know anything about our family, about what James built, about what I sacrificed supporting him. What did you sacrifice? I'd asked. From what I've read, you never worked a day in your life. You lived off James's money. You contributed nothing to his success. And now you're trying to steal from his son, your nephew, because you think you're entitled to money you never earned. I'm his brother, and I'm his son. He chose me. Accept it. The mediation had broken down after that. Harrison had stormed out. Gerard had tried to salvage things with talk of settlements. Perhaps we could agree to a 70-30 split, but Duncan had shut that down immediately. Cole gets 100% as specified in the will. That's not negotiable. Then we'll see you in court, Gerard had said, and that's exactly what had happened. The probate hearing had been scheduled for 6 weeks after the failed mediation. During that time, Duncan and Catherine had prepared our case like it was going to trial. We need to prove 3 things, Duncan had explained over coffee in his office. 1, that you're really James's biological son. 2, that James was competent when he updated his will. 3, that Harrison's claims are fraudulent and that he engaged in criminal activity to try to steal your inheritance. Those 6 weeks had been a blur of preparation. Depositions, document review, expert consultations. I'd spent hours with lawyers going over every detail of my life, my adoption, my DNA results. The DNA evidence had been our strongest point. We'd had the original test results from the Ancestry site, the one I'd taken as a joke at Marcus's barbecue. But we hadn't stopped there. Duncan had arranged for 2 additional independent DNA tests using samples from both me and from James's remains. Different labs, different methodologies, different analysts who'd never communicated with each other. All 3 tests had shown the same result. 99.97% probability of paternity between James Whitmore Ashford and Cole Michael Brennan. It's as close to certainty as genetic science can get. Our expert witness, Dr. Patricia Ramirez from Columbia University, had explained during her deposition. 3 independent analyses, using different genetic markers, all confirming the same biological relationship. The odds of all 3 being wrong are essentially 0. Harrison's team had tried to challenge it, had hired their own genetic expert, Dr. Martin Holbrook, a semi-retired professor who made extra money testifying for whoever paid him. Dr. Holbrook had testified that DNA tests could be contaminated or misinterpreted, that lab errors happened, that without proper chain of custody, the results couldn't be trusted, but on cross-examination, Catherine had torn him apart. Dr. Holbrook, you testified that DNA test results can be contaminated. How many samples would need to be contaminated in exactly the same way to produce 3 identical false positives? Well, theoretically, doctor, what are the odds? It's difficult to calculate. Is it more or less likely than winning the lottery 3 times in a row? I suppose less likely. So you're asking this court to believe that 3 separate labs, using different samples, different methodologies, and different analysts, all made the exact same error. An error so unlikely it's comparable to winning the lottery 3 times. Is that your expert opinion? Dr. Holbrook had shifted uncomfortably. I'm simply saying the possibility exists. The possibility that Cole Brennan won the genetic lottery 3 times over? That's your defense? He'd had no good answer. The competency evidence had been even more straightforward. James had undergone 2 separate psychiatric evaluations as part of the estate planning process, standard procedure for high-value estates where contests were likely. Both evaluations had been conducted by board-certified psychiatrists. Both had included extensive cognitive testing. Both had concluded the same thing. James Whitmore Ashford was of sound mind, understood the nature and extent of his property, understood who his natural heirs were, and was capable of making informed decisions about his estate. We'd had his medical records going back 5 years. No evidence of dementia, no evidence of cognitive decline. His primary care physician had testified that James had been sharper at 67 than most people are at 40. We'd had testimony from his business associates, his employees, his friends, all of them confirming that James had been mentally sharp right up until the day he died. Harrison's team had tried to claim James had been emotionally compromised by his desire to find his son, that he'd been so desperate for family that he'd been willing to believe a false DNA match, that his judgment had been clouded by grief over Sarah's death and regret over the adoption. But we'd had James's own words, video testimony he'd recorded when he'd updated his will, not just the brief statement that had been played at the mediation, the full recording, 37 minutes long, where James had explained every detail of his decision. The video had been played in court. The judge, attorneys, and a small gallery of observers had watched as James Whitmore Ashford had spoken directly to the camera, his voice clear and steady, his reasoning logical and detailed. My name is James Whitmore Ashford. I'm 67 years old. Today is March 15th, 2024. I'm recording this testimony in the law offices of Garrison, Mercer and Associates in Manhattan, New York. I'm here voluntarily. I've been evaluated by 2 independent psychiatrists who've confirmed I'm of sound mind. I'm making this recording because I know my brother Harrison will contest my will, and I want there to be no doubt about my intentions. First, let me address the DNA test results. I've been searching for my son for over 20 years. In January of this year, my son Cole took a DNA test through an ancestry website. The test matched us as father and son. I immediately arranged for 2 additional tests through independent laboratories to confirm the result. All 3 tests confirmed the same thing. Cole Brennan is my biological son. He's not a fraud. He's not a scammer. He's my child. James had paused, his emotion visible. Cole's mother, Sarah Brennan, was the love of my life. We dated for 6 months in 1988. She became pregnant. I was thrilled. I wanted to marry her, raise our child together, build a family. But Sarah came from a family with a history of mental illness. She struggled with severe depression and anxiety. When she found out she was pregnant, she became convinced she couldn't be a mother, convinced she'd harm our child somehow. So she left, disappeared while she was 6 months pregnant. I looked for her desperately but couldn't find her. 7 months later, I received a letter telling me she'd had the baby, a boy, and had given him up for adoption. A closed adoption. One I couldn't access, couldn't challenge, couldn't open. I tried. God, I tried. I hired investigators, filed legal challenges, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to find my son. But the adoption was sealed tight. Pennsylvania adoption law made it nearly impossible to unseal records without both birth parents' consent. And Sarah had disappeared again. No one could find her. When she died in 2003, I tried again. Thought maybe with her death, the records could be opened. But even that didn't work. The adoption remained sealed. So I've spent 25 years not knowing my son. Not knowing where he was, who he was, what his life was like. Just knowing he existed somewhere, living a life I had no part of. And then, this year, he took a DNA test. A simple over-the-counter DNA test. And suddenly, after all these years, I found him. James had looked directly at the camera, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Cole, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry your mother and I couldn't make it work. I'm sorry you grew up without me, but I want you to know, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping I'd find you someday. And now, even though it's too late for us to have a relationship, I can at least make sure you're taken care of, that you inherit what should have been yours from the beginning. He'd paused, gathering himself. Now let me address Harrison, my brother, the man who's probably watching this video right now, furious that I've left him nothing. Harrison has lived off my money his entire adult life. He's never held a real job, never built anything, never contributed anything except taking. I've supported him out of family obligation, but I've never respected him. When I told him I'd found my son, you know what his first question was? Not congratulations, not I'm happy for you, not when can I meet him? His first question was, what does this mean for my inheritance? That told me everything I needed to know. So let me be absolutely clear. I'm leaving everything to Cole, not because I know him, I don't, and that's my greatest regret, but because he's my blood. He's my legacy. He's what I should have had from the beginning. He's the family I was meant to have. Harrison will claim I'm being manipulated. He'll claim Cole is a fraud. He'll claim I'm not thinking clearly. I don't believe him. I'm thinking more clearly now than I have in years. I've had 2 psychiatric evaluations. Both confirmed I'm of sound mind. I understand the nature and extent of my property. I understand who my natural heirs are. and I'm making an informed, deliberate choice to leave everything to my son. Harrison has had decades of financial support from me, decades of living off my success. That ends now. At 65 years old, it's time for him to finally learn to support himself. If you're watching this, Cole, know that I'm sorry I never got to meet you. I'm sorry we never got to have the father-son relationship we should have had. But I'm glad you existed. I'm glad I found you, even if it was too late. Take what I've left you and build something good with it. Build a family, build a business, build a life. That's all I ask. To the court, please honor my wishes. Please make sure my son inherits what I've left him. Don't let my brother steal from him out of greed. Cole deserves this. He's my son. That's all that matters. The video had ended. The courtroom had been completely silent. Judge Morrison had removed her glasses, wiping her eyes. Even Harrison's lawyer, Gerard, had looked moved. That's powerful testimony, the judge had said quietly. Mr. Hutchins, how do you respond to that? Gerard had stood, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, while the testimony is emotional, it doesn't change the fundamental issues. This video shows a man obsessed with finding his lost son, a man whose judgment was clouded by decades of regret and grief. He admitted he didn't even know Cole. He left $114 million to a stranger based solely on a DNA test. A stranger who's his biological son, Catherine had countered immediately. Your Honor, there's nothing unusual about a father leaving his estate to his child. What's unusual is an uncle demanding he inherit instead when a direct heir exists. The direct heir showed up at a very convenient time, Gerard had argued. Right after James died. Right after the previous will would have given everything to Harrison. Cole took his DNA test 6 weeks before James died, Catherine had responded. He had no idea James was even looking for him. He had no idea who James was. He took a $39 DNA test as a joke at a friend's barbecue. The timeline alone disproves any claim of manipulation or fraud. The third part of our case, proving Harrison's fraud, had been the most damaging for him. We'd presented everything: emails, phone records, affidavits, bank records showing payments to private investigators, documentation of his attempts to access sealed adoption records. One piece of evidence in particular had been devastating. An email from Harrison to one of his investigators, dated 2 months before James died. Trevor, I don't care what it costs. Find proof that this son doesn't exist or isn't really James's. My brother is convinced he's found his kid based on some DNA test. If that will gets updated before he dies, I lose $114 million. Whatever you need to do, do it. Access hospital records, talk to adoption agencies. Hell, create documents if you have to. I'm not losing my inheritance to some random person who shows up claiming to be family. Bill me whatever you need. Just make this problem disappear before James changes his will. Harrison. Make this problem disappear, Judge Morrison had repeated, reading the email aloud. Mr. Ashford, this is a direct admission that you were willing to fabricate evidence to disinherit your brother's son. Harrison had half stood from his chair, his face red. That's taken out of context. I was just... Sit down, Mr. Ashford, the judge had ordered. You'll have a chance to testify if you choose. Mr. Hutchins, what context makes this email acceptable? Gerard had looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Your Honor, emotions were running high. My client had just learned his brother was planning to disinherit him. He was in shock. He was calculating how to commit fraud, the judge had corrected. He's openly discussing creating false documents to prevent a rightful heir from inheriting. That's not shock. That's premeditation. We'd presented more. Affidavits from 3 court clerks Harrison had approached offering bribes to alter adoption records. Phone records showing he'd called hospitals in Pennsylvania pretending to be a state official investigating adoption fraud. Emails to various adoption agencies claiming he needed records for a criminal investigation. All of it showing a clear pattern. Harrison had known Cole existed, had known the DNA match was real, and had engaged in systematic criminal activity to try to erase Cole from the record before James could update his will. The most damning testimony had come from one of the private investigators Harrison had hired, a man named Trevor Walsh, who decided to cooperate after being contacted by law enforcement. Mr. Walsh, Catherine had asked during examination, can you describe what Harrison Ashford hired you to do? He hired me to find proof that Cole Brennan either didn't exist or wasn't James Ashford's biological son, Trevor had said. He told me he needed evidence to challenge the will update. And what methods did he suggest you use? He told me to access sealed adoption records however I could. He suggested bribing court officials. He mentioned the possibility of creating documents if I couldn't find real ones. Creating documents? As in forgery? Yes, ma'am. He said if I couldn't find evidence that Cole wasn't James's son, I should create evidence that Cole had died as an infant or that the adoption records were fraudulent. And did you do any of this? No, I refused. I told Mr. Ashford I wasn't willing to break the law or fabricate evidence. He was angry. He called me unprofessional and refused to pay my final invoice. Do you have documentation of these conversations? Yes. I recorded our phone calls after he asked me to commit crimes. I wanted to protect myself legally. Catherine had played portions of the recordings. Harrison's voice, angry and desperate, telling Trevor to do whatever it takes to stop Cole from inheriting. The courtroom had listened in stunned silence as Harrison's own words had condemned him. The hearing had lasted 2 days. At the end, the judge had taken 1 day to deliberate. When she'd returned with her ruling, I'd been sitting next to Duncan, my hands clenched together, barely breathing. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, Judge Morrison had begun, I find as follows. 1. Cole Michael Brennan is definitively the biological son of James Whitmore Ashford, as confirmed by multiple independent DNA analyses. 2. James Whitmore Ashford was of sound mind when he executed his will 6 months ago, as confirmed by psychiatric evaluation and video testimony. 3. Harrison Ashford engaged in fraudulent and illegal activity in an attempt to prevent Cole Brennan from inheriting, including but not limited to attempted bribery, accessing sealed records, and conspiracy to manufacture false evidence. Therefore, I rule that James Whitmore Ashford's will dated March 15, 2024 is valid and enforceable. Cole Michael Brennan is the rightful heir to the entire estate. Harrison Ashford's contest is dismissed. Furthermore, I am referring Harrison Ashford's actions to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. This court will not tolerate attempts to defraud rightful heirs through illegal means. The estate is released from probate. Mr. Brennan, you may access your inheritance immediately. I'd sat there, stunned, as Duncan had shaken my hand. Congratulations, he'd said. You just became a very wealthy man. Harrison had stood up, his face purple with rage. This isn't over. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing, the judge had said coldly. You've lost, Mr. Ashford. And if you continue to harass Mr. Brennan or interfere with this inheritance, you'll be facing criminal charges. Do I make myself clear? Harrison had stormed out of the courtroom without another word, and I'd sat there, trying to process that it was over. I'd won. Everything James had wanted me to have was mine. The first thing I'd seen had been the penthouse. 432 Park Avenue, one of the most expensive residential buildings in Manhattan. James had owned the entire 87th floor and 6,500 square feet of luxury overlooking Central Park. Duncan had given me the key cards. It's yours now, everything in it. Take your time looking around. I'd gone alone, had wanted to see it by myself first, to process it without anyone watching my reactions. The elevator had opened directly into the penthouse. Private elevator, key card access only. Already I'd felt like I was in a different world. The space had been breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows on all sides. Open-plan living area with designer furniture. A kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. 4 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. A library with built-in shelves full of first-edition books. An office with a view of the entire city. And everywhere, photographs. James and a young woman, Sarah, my birth mother, laughing together. Sarah pregnant, James's hand on her belly, both of them smiling. James alone, older, standing on a yacht. James at charity events, at business conferences, at art galleries. A life documented in images. And in one corner of the living room, a wall dedicated to me. Photos of Sarah, pregnant. A copy of my birth certificate. Somehow he'd obtained it despite the sealed adoption. Newspaper clippings about adoption reform. Printouts of DNA results. Legal documents from his search for me. And in the center, a photo that made my breath catch. A picture of me, recent, from my Facebook profile. Me at Marcus's barbecue, smiling at the camera. James had found my social media, had been looking at photos of me, had known what I looked like even though we'd never met. Below the photo, a note in his handwriting, Cole, my son. I'm sorry I never got to tell you I loved you. I hope you can forgive me for not finding you sooner. This is yours now. All of it. Make it mean something. Dad. I'd sat down on my couch and cried. The yacht had been docked at a private marina in New Jersey. Sarah's Dream, named after my mother. 185 feet long. Crew quarters for 12, 5 luxury cabins, multiple decks, a swimming pool, a helipad, worth $15 million. The captain, a man named Richard Santiago, who'd worked for James for 8 years, had given me a tour. Mr. Ashford loved this yacht, Richard had said. He'd come out here when he needed to think. Sometimes he'd just sit on the deck for hours, looking at the water, not saying anything. Did he ever talk about me? I'd asked. Richard had nodded. All the time, especially the last few years. He'd talk about how he was looking for his son, how he hoped to find you someday, how he wanted to bring you out here and show you the ocean. We'd walked through the yacht, the master cabin with a king bed and marble bathroom, the formal dining room that could seat 12, the observation deck with panoramic views. Everything had been maintained perfectly, ready for use at any moment. What happens to the crew? I'd asked. Now that James is gone? That depends on you, Richard had said. We're all still on payroll. The estate's been paying us through probate, but if you don't want to keep the yacht, we'll need to find other positions. I want to keep it, I'd said immediately. I don't know anything about yachts, but I want to learn. Can you teach me? Richard had smiled. It would be my honor, Mr. Brennan. Call me Cole. The vault had been the most surreal part. Manhattan's secure storage, a private facility that catered to the ultra-wealthy, climate-controlled rooms, 24-hour security, biometric access. James had rented one of the largest vaults, room 847. Duncan had transferred access to me, had given me the new key codes and biometric scan. I'd walked into the vault alone. The room had been the size of a small apartment, shelves along every wall, climate control units humming, soft lighting, and everywhere, treasure, gold bars, dozens of them, each one stamped with certification marks, each one worth approximately $60,000, total value over $4 million. Rare coins in protective cases, historical artifacts, ancient Roman coins, Victorian jewelry, a signed first edition of The Great Gatsby, art paintings by famous artists carefully stored and preserved, sculptures, ceramics. And in one corner, a collection of personal items that had made me stop breathing. A baby blanket, blue with white stars. My baby blanket, somehow preserved from the hospital where I'd been born. My birth certificate. The original, not a copy. Hospital records from my birth. Photos of Sarah in the delivery room. Photos of me as a newborn. A letter from Sarah to James, never sent. Pages and pages of her explaining why she'd given me up, why she couldn't be a mother, why she thought it was better this way. James, I know you'll never forgive me for this. I know you'll spend the rest of your life angry at me for taking your son away. But please understand, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to protect Cole. My family is broken, James. We're full of mental illness and addiction and dysfunction. My mother can't function without medication. My brother's been in and out of psychiatric facilities his entire adult life. And me, I can barely get out of bed some days. The depression is so heavy, I feel like I'm drowning. I can't raise a child like this. I can't risk Cole growing up with a mother who might not be able to take care of him, who might hurt him without meaning to, who might pass on this terrible legacy. He deserves better. He deserves parents who are stable and healthy and capable. Parents who chose him and want him. I'm giving him that chance. I'm giving him up so he can have a real life. I hope someday you'll understand. I hope someday you'll forgive me. I loved you. I still love you. But I love our son more. And loving him means letting him go. Sarah, I'd sat in that vault for 2 hours, reading Sarah's letters, looking at photos of me as a baby, trying to understand the woman who'd given birth to me and then given me away. She'd thought she was protecting me, thought she was giving me a better life. And maybe she had. My adoptive parents had been wonderful. I'd had a good childhood, a stable home, love, and support. But I'd also lost my biological parents. Lost James, who'd spent decades looking for me. Lost Sarah, who'd died alone thinking she'd done the right thing. The vault had felt like a museum of loss, of what could have been, of the family I should have had. Ashford Global Industries, headquarters in downtown Manhattan, annual revenue of $94 million, 300 employees, operations in 12 countries. And as of probate's completion, I owned 100% of it. The board of directors had requested a meeting, had wanted to meet the new owner, had probably wanted to assess whether I was capable of running a multinational company or whether I'd sell it immediately. I'd arrived at the headquarters building in a suit Duncan had insisted I buy. You can't show up to run a $94 million company in your target clearance special. The boardroom had been on the top floor, 12 people around a long table, the interim CEO, Margaret Cho, who'd been running things since James's death, the CFO, the COO, various vice presidents, all of them looking at me with varying degrees of skepticism. Mr. Brennan, Margaret had said, welcome, we're glad to finally meet you. Thank you. I know this is unusual. I know you weren't expecting James's son to suddenly appear and take over. That's one way to put it, the CFO had said, His nameplate read Robert Winters. "No offense, but you're a graphic designer. You have no business experience, and now you own a manufacturing and real estate conglomerate." "You're right," I'd said. "I have no experience running a company like this. I don't know manufacturing. I don't know real estate. I don't know international business." "So what are you planning to do?" Margaret had asked. "Sell the company? Install yourself as CEO despite having no qualifications? We need to know what direction you're taking us." "I'm planning to learn," I'd said. "I'm planning to work with all of you to understand this business, to understand what my father built, and to make sure his legacy continues." "That's a nice sentiment," Robert had said skeptically. "But running a company takes more than good intentions." "I know, which is why I'm not planning to run it. Not yet. Not until I actually know what I'm doing." I'd looked at Margaret. "You've been interim CEO for 3 months. From what I've read in the financials, the company has performed well under your leadership. I'd like to offer you the position permanently." Margaret had looked surprised. "You want me to be CEO?" "Yes. You know this company. You know the industry. You know what James wanted. I don't. Not yet. So I want you to keep running things while I learn. I'll be an active owner. I want to understand every part of this business. But the day-to-day operations should be run by someone who knows what they're doing." The room had relaxed visibly. "That's surprisingly reasonable," Robert had said. "My father built something important here," I'd said. 300 people depend on this company for their livelihoods. Customers depend on our products. I'm not going to destroy that because I'm too arrogant to admit I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to learn. And once I do, I'll make decisions about the company's future. But until then, I want all of you to keep doing what you do best." Margaret had smiled. James would have liked that approach. He always said the sign of a good leader is knowing when to delegate. "Then let's make sure we're good leaders," I'd said. "All of us, together." It's been a year since Duncan Garrett's email changed my life forever. 365 days since I learned I was the son of a billionaire. 12 months since I went from being a struggling graphic designer to the owner of a $114 million estate. I'm sitting on the deck of Sarah's Dream, anchored off the coast of Maine, drinking coffee from a French press that costs more than my old monthly rent, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. The yacht is mine now. Really mine, not just legally, but emotionally. I've spent dozens of weekends out here, learning to navigate, learning to understand the ocean, learning to appreciate what James loved about being on the water. Richard Santiago, the captain, has been incredibly patient, teaching me everything from basic maritime law to advanced navigation, showing me how to read weather patterns, how to handle the boat in rough seas, how to appreciate the silence of open water. "Your father used to sit right there," Richard had told me the first time I'd come aboard after inheriting. He'd pointed to the spot where I'm sitting now, at the bow of the yacht, facing east toward the sunrise. "He'd watch the sun come up and talk about you, about how he hoped you'd like the ocean, about how he wanted to take you sailing someday, about all the places he wanted to show you." I do like the ocean. James was right about that. There's something about being out here, away from the city, away from the noise, away from the constant demands of running a company and managing an estate, that feels healing, necessary. I'd brought my adoptive parents out here last month. Mom and Dad, they'll always be Mom and Dad to me, regardless of biology, had been overwhelmed. "Cole, I don't even have words," Mom had said, standing on the deck, looking at the luxury surrounding her. "You own this. You actually own this." "James owned it," I'd corrected. "I'm just the steward now." "No," Dad had said firmly. "James left it to you. You own it. And son, you need to accept that this is your life now. You earned this by existing, by being his child. There's no shame in that." They'd stayed for a weekend. We'd sailed up the coast, had dinner on the deck, talked late into the night about everything that had happened, about how surreal it all was, about how my life had changed completely in the span of a few months. "Are you happy?" Mom had asked me on the second night, the two of us sitting alone while Dad slept. "I don't know," I'd admitted. "I'm grateful, I'm overwhelmed, I'm processing. But happy? I'm not sure I know what that means anymore." "That's fair," she'd said. "You lost a father you never knew. You gained a fortune you never expected. That's a lot to process. Do you ever wonder what my life would have been like if Sarah hadn't given me up? If I'd been raised by James instead of you?" Mom had been quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. But Cole, you need to understand something. Sarah made the choice she thought was right. She gave you to us because she wanted you to have a stable, loving home, and we gave you that. We loved you, we raised you, we gave you everything we could." "I know." "And James spent 25 years looking for you. He never gave up. He left you everything he had. That's love, too. Different from ours, but just as real. So I had 3 parents who loved me, I'd said. Sarah, who gave me up to protect me. You and Dad, who raised me, and James, who searched for me until the day he died. You had 3 parents who loved you, Mom had agreed, and that's not something everyone gets to say. The penthouse is my home now. I'd sold my tiny apartment in Queens, the 1 bedroom with the leaky faucet and the upstairs neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. Didn't need it anymore. Hadn't stepped foot in it since inheriting the 87th floor of 432 Park Avenue. The penthouse is everything I never knew I wanted. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park, a kitchen with appliances I'm still learning to use, a master bedroom that's larger than my entire old apartment, 3 guest rooms for when people visit, and everywhere reminders of James. His books line the built-in shelves in the library. First editions, signed copies, rare volumes on architecture and business and art. I've been reading them slowly, trying to understand what interested him, what shaped his thinking. His art collection covers the walls. Paintings I now know are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Some of them I love, abstract pieces full of color and energy. Some of them I don't understand at all, but I'm learning. Taking art history classes online, visiting museums, trying to develop the appreciation James had, and the photos. So many photos. I've kept all of James's photos up. The ones of him and Sarah, young and in love. The ones of him building his company, standing at construction sites and ribbon cuttings. The ones of him on this yacht, on his travels, at charity events. But I've added my own photos now, too. Pictures of my adoptive parents, Mom and Dad, who raised me, who loved me, who shaped who I am. They hang right next to the photos of James and Sarah because they're all my family. All of them contributed to making me who I am. Pictures of Marcus and Nina, who still treat me exactly the same as before, who still invite me to their barbecues, still tease me about my terrible taste in movies, still ground me in the reality of who I was before all this happened. Pictures of the Ashford Global Industries team, Margaret Cho and Robert Winters, and all the people who've been teaching me how to run a $94 million company. And in the center of the living room wall, the photo James had hung of me, downloaded from my Facebook profile, printed and framed. Me at Marcus's barbecue, smiling at the camera, unaware that my biological father was looking at this image, grateful to finally see his son's face. Below that photo, James had written a note in his own handwriting. Cole, my son, I'm sorry I never got to tell you I loved you. I hope you can forgive me for not finding you sooner. This is yours now. All of it. Make it mean something. Dad. I'd added my own note below his, in my handwriting. I wish I'd met you, Dad. I wish we'd had time. But thank you for finding me. Thank you for leaving me this life. I'm trying to make it mean something. I promise I'm trying. Cole. The company is thriving. Ashford Global Industries under Margaret's leadership has had its best year in a decade. Revenue up 12%, 3 new international contracts, expansion into sustainable manufacturing that's both profitable and environmentally responsible. I've spent the year learning the business, not just sitting in boardrooms, though there's been plenty of that, but actually learning, working in the factories for weeks at a time, understanding how our products are made, shadowing sales teams on client calls, attending industry conferences and trade shows, reading everything I can about manufacturing, real estate development, international business law. Margaret had been skeptical at first. Most owners who inherit companies just want to collect dividends and stay out of the way, she'd said. You really want to learn this business? I really do, I'd told her. My father built this. I'm not going to let it fail because I was too lazy to understand how it works. She'd smiled. James would have said exactly the same thing. I'm not ready to be CEO. Not yet. Maybe not for years. But I will be eventually. That's my goal. To actually earn the right to run this company, not just inherit the right. The vault at Manhattan Secure Storage is still full of treasures. I visit it sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep and I need to feel connected to James. The gold bars are still there. Over $4 million worth of certified bullion, gleaming under the climate-controlled lights. I haven't touched them. They feel like they should stay exactly where James left them. The rare coins and historical artifacts I've been cataloging. Working with a curator from the Metropolitan Museum to document everything, appraise everything, understand everything. Some of the pieces are museum quality, ancient Roman coins that date back to Caesar, Victorian jewelry that belonged to European royalty, a signed first edition of The Great Gatsby that's one of only 100 copies. I've donated some of it. The Gatsby book went to the New York Public Library in James's name. Some of the Victorian pieces went to the Costume Institute at the Met. I kept the things that felt personal, that had obvious meaning to James, but the rest I'm sharing with institutions that can preserve them and let other people appreciate them. The art collection is being prepared for a possible touring exhibition. The private collection of James Whitmore Ashford. Museums in 5 cities have already expressed interest. I'm working with art historians to create informative displays, to tell the story of how James built this collection, what he loved about each piece. But Sarah's letters, those I've kept completely private. They're too personal, too painful, too raw. I read them sometimes, though, late at night, sitting in the vault, trying to understand the woman who gave birth to me and then gave me away. James, I know you'll never forgive me for this. I know you'll spend the rest of your life angry at me for taking your son away. But please understand, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to protect Cole. My family is broken, James. We're full of mental illness and addiction and dysfunction. My mother can't function without medication. My brother's been in and out of psychiatric facilities his entire adult life. And me? I can barely get out of bed some days. The depression is so heavy, I feel like I'm drowning. I can't raise a child like this. I can't risk Cole growing up with a mother who might not be able to take care of him, who might hurt him without meaning to, who might pass on this terrible legacy. He deserves better. He deserves parents who are stable and healthy and capable, parents who chose him and want him. I'm giving him that chance. I'm giving him up so he can have a real life. Reading those letters, I understand Sarah better than I ever expected to. She wasn't abandoning me. She was protecting me from what she perceived as her own brokenness. She was wrong. Mental illness doesn't make someone unfit to be a parent. Therapy and medication and support can make all the difference. But she didn't know that. She only knew her own struggle, her own fear, her own conviction that she couldn't be what I needed, so she made an impossible choice. Gave me up to give me a chance. I've established a scholarship fund in her name, the Sarah Brennan Memorial Scholarship for students from families affected by mental illness, for kids whose parents struggle with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, for people who've been told they're damaged or broken because of their family history. The fund provides $25,000 annually to 5 students, college tuition, living expenses, therapy costs if needed, everything they need to build lives that aren't defined by their family's struggles. The first recipients were selected 6 months ago. I'd add I'm James Whitmore Ashford's son, and this is my legacy now.